Yes, and we are live. Our Fan War Room Training Camp 2019 Road to Redemption. It is finally here, guys. And I said this a couple days ago, and I'll just start here. I said to Stokely, my everyday partner, I said, I'm as excited, and Stink, we'll start with you. And let me just introduce our panel quickly before we get underway. Mark Schlereth here, one half of Schlereth and Evans. Of course, my everyday co-host, one half of Stokely and Zach, Brandon Stokely. Nick Ferguson of the Safety Blitz, and James Marilat from 1043thefan.com. Tremendous cast of characters here, guys. Thanks for being here. I know we all have our own duties, so this is extra. But Stink, we'll start with you and move our way down the end of the table. I said a couple days ago that, yes, I'm as excited to start training camp 2019, but I'm almost equally as excited to put 2017 and 18 behind us. Back-to-back losing seasons, first time since Richard Nixon was the president in the early 70s. It has just been so bad. It's had such a negative tone around here. So just as excited to turn the page here.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question, the excitement to turn the page, but I look at, there's so many questions that I feel like are going to get answered. You know, there's so many people that look at this thing like, well, it's like I have looked at it, like the talent level isn't what it has needed to be, and the depth isn't what it needed to be, and I still think we lack some depth, but there's that side of the kind of coin that people look at and say, well, it's all talent and it's all this, and then it was, well, Vance Joseph is in over his head, and Vance Joseph and his staff aren't good enough, and I think a lot of the questions that we've had about this roster and about this football team as an organization are going to be answered. And I'm excited because I just believe what they have done the last couple of years to bolster their roster. And like I said, I still believe that their roster lacks depth, but I think there's more talent at the top end of their roster than there has been in a couple of years. But to have a NFL coach that's got some gravitas about him, that's done it for a very long time, that I think will bring some discipline and some execution game day to this organization, I think that's a great thing. And in a day and age where everybody's going young and we're getting the next young coach and college coaches that have never done it before and guys that have never been head coaches, I know that Vic Fangio hasn't been a head coach, but he brings a certain credibility to the Broncos organization, which I think they have lacked. When we talk about developing and building a culture, I think that's something that they have lacked the last couple of years, and I think that solves, that part of the equation is solved with Vic Fangio.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the last 2 years, the Vance Joseph era, right? Now we get to kind of turn the page on that, and now it's the Vic Fangio era. How will that look? And like Mark said, he's never been a head coach, but he's a veteran defensive coordinator, so he's run sides of the football. He's been in charge of the defensive side of the football. And with Vance Joseph, he was that for 1 year in Miami, and it wasn't even that good in Miami. So we have more of a proven coach. Now we'll see how it handle being a head coach, but I like the direction that this organization is heading. And I don't think they're going to take a huge step this year, but I like the direction. I think they are starting to move in the right direction. And like Mark said, this training camp is going to answer a lot of questions and going to show us a lot about who the Broncos will be in 2019.
Nick, why are you excited for training camp?
Well, for me, the reason that I'm excited about this year's training camp is because of Vic Fangio and Mike Munchak. And I know there's a lot of individuals who are down on the Broncos. They're not giving them a lot of credit. Mark talked about a lot of question marks and not having an adequate depth at certain key positions. But, you know, I like that. I like the underdog approach. I mean, Chris Harris Jr., he was viewed as being an underdog. Joe Flacco was the underdog. Garrett Bowles, who everyone seems to be piling on a lot, now he is an underdog. And the way that I break this team down, I say, well, yeah, there's not a lot of head coaching experience. I mean, looking at Scangarello being the first-time play caller, Fangio being at 60, getting his first opportunity to be a head coach. But essentially you have a head coach on the defensive side of the ball and you have a head coach on the offensive side of the ball, because Mike Munchak, he used to be a head coach in the NFL. So if Rick Scangarello start to have issues calling plays, building that chemistry, now you have a guy who's been there, who's a Hall of Fame offensive lineman who can help you out. So that's why I don't look at the season as being as dreadful as most people, do when they give their prediction. Now, I'm the person on the station that said 12-4, while everyone else is thinking 9-7 and 8-8. But I played here when it was at a certain standard. So I'm trying to get things back to that standard, but that's just my level of excitement and belief in this organization and the coaches they put together.
And we will get back later in today's War Room to our forecast of the 2019 season. But before we do that, James Marilat from 1043thefan.com, react to anything that you just heard.
Well, I'm just tired of watching a baseball team that loses 19-2. So we get to watch football now, talk football. That's the reason to be excited about it. But no, in all seriousness, to me, the two most important things of any organization, it's the head coach and it's the quarterback. And in both those areas, this team is so vastly improved over what we've seen the last couple of years that, I think there's reason to be optimistic, maybe cautiously optimistic. But Joe Flacco, say what you will about him, he's light years better than what we saw with Trevor Siemian and Case Keenum. And the Vance Joseph era was a disaster. And Vic Fangio, it's a little bit like when they went from McDaniels to John Fox. Okay, now all of a sudden a grown-up is in the room again. I think that's what we're going to see from a head coaching standpoint. So from a football side of things, head coach, quarterback, big improvement, reason to be optimistic heading into camp.
Zach, it's interesting as I travel around and call games for Fox. Everybody has this, can we just get the ode of McVay on us, right? McVay. And everybody looks at it like a young guy. And you sit down and talk with Sean McVay, and it's like I left the meeting with him going, I haven't accomplished anything in my entire life. I felt like, wow, blown away by him. Or Matt Nagy, the same thing. You feel blown away by maturity beyond their years, energy. They walk in the room and it's energized. I always say there's two types of people who walk in the room and energize it, people who walk out of the room and energize it, right? And these are guys that are so unique, and to sit here as an organization and just think it's a young guy. I'm talking to Vance Joseph, and I'm not bashing on Vance Joseph, but I said, how much, as we're preparing to do the Rams game, I go, how much interaction do you have with Wade Phillips, who was a former defense coordinator here? He's 76, 77 years old. And he goes, I talk to Wade, a couple times a week. He goes, he sends me all these emojis and all these, and I've got to ask people what it means. And I'm like, so here you hire a young coach in Vance Joseph, and you think he's going to connect with the players because you think he's young and maybe he knows. There's nobody that connected any better with the players than Wade Phillips did.
Right.
And so age has nothing to do with your ability to connect and your ability to communicate. And so that's one of the reasons that I'm excited. I think a lot of teams went young simply because they saw the success that McVay had and thought it had something to do with young. No, it has something to do with communication and getting his guys to play for him. And I'm telling you, it's just a different cat. So I'm really excited about the Broncos kind of bucking that trend and going with a guy that has has had a ton of success and has kind of instant credibility when he walks in the building.
And I have to share this line with you from Connor Orr of Sports Illustrated. He said the Broncos bucked the trend of chasing the Sean McVay brat pack.
Right.
And I thought that was the perfect way to say it. Stoke, do you believe the Broncos have their guy? Vic Fangio is going to be the coach in 2022, 2023.
I do. Everything that we've seen so far, to me, checks the boxes for Vic Fangio. So I believe that they have the right guy. I like the hire. The guy's been in the NFL for a long time, been very successful. He hadn't had an opportunity to be a head coach. That doesn't mean that he's not going to be a head coach. I actually like the experience that he has, and kind of piggybacking off of the trend and going against the trend. Just because everybody else is doing it doesn't mean these young guys are going to be successful. I like John realizing the mistake that he made with Vance Joseph and doing it different this year, and not just going with the trend of getting one of these young guys and just saying, I'm going to do what everybody else is doing. Found a guy that's a perfect fit, I think, for him and I think for this organization. Now, we will see. Who actually knows what Vic Fangio is going to look like on Sundays, how he's going to operate. Nobody does. So we'll see when the lights come on how he'll perform, but I think he's going to be fine. I think it was a really good hire.
Nick?
I really believe in Coach Fangio. I think they have found the right guy. When you look at what Mark was talking about, following the trend, Sean McVay, there's a lot of coaches in the league that come from that Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, Mike Shanahan tree. Zach Taylor is now the head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals, and Matt LaFleur is now in Green Bay. What coach and with what team actually stopped the Rams before the Pats played them? It was the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. When I talked to Coach Fangio about it, and he said basically what the Patriots did is followed his blueprint. So when you're going to look for a head coach, and I know everyone's enamored with putting points up on the board, but it's never going to change. Football is about throwing the ball, tackling, and running, right? And you have to be able to slow down some of these so-called high-powered quarterbacks and offenses. So you go out and you get your defensive guy. I mean, a lot of people are not putting a lot of merit into what Coach Fangio brings because he's a 60-year-old head coach and with no head coaching experience. For me, that's what I want. I mean, today there was a list printed out as far as the ranking of coaches, right? Fangio was 27th. Of the top coaches, all of those coaches are 60 and above. That's a lot of football knowledge. And we saw when the Patriots played the Sean McVay and the Rams, and I go back to this look that Sean McVay had on his face. He looked puzzled. He looked stumped because guess what? He couldn't match wits with Bill Belichick at that time. So to me, defense still wins championship, as cliche as that is, but that's another level of optimism that I have, and I had the distinct pleasure of telling Coach Fangio my whole idea of 12-4. And he ran away from me, but I made sure I followed him because I wanted him to burn that 12-4 image into his mind. So when he goes to training camp tomorrow and start talking to players, he thinks about that. And he's thinking about me, Nick Ferguson, that I said that because I'm putting a lot of pressure on him and his defense to be great because I know they can.
We're going to get back to your 12-4.
Yeah, you're
Don't
really
you worry.
owning that 12-4, man.
Hey,
mine.
I like
Slow
it.
down.
I like
Slow
it.
down on
I
that
put
one.
it out there.
I like it. Hey, have a take. I like it.
Doubling down on that, buddy. Just stop it.
James Merrill at 1043thefan.com. The Broncos have had as much change at the coaching position as any team in the sport. Do they finally have their guy?
I think so, and I like the idea of zigging when everybody else is zagging. I think what the guys have mentioned here makes a lot of sense. Don't just follow the trend to follow the trend. I will say, though, I'm not worried about his age. I couldn't care less that he's 60. I'm with you in terms of Wade Phillips and his ability to relate to younger players. That's not an age thing. The only thing that worries me about it is the fact that it took this long to get that opportunity and to become a head coach. That's a little bit of a red flag to me. Like, why? Why was he passed by that many times? Why was he not in that position? There has to be some explanation for it. Sometimes you just get overlooked and you have the ability, you have the talent, and I don't know, maybe you just didn't look the part, right?
He said at his introductory press conference, he said, I've never fit the profile of being a head coach. He's kind of surly. He's sort of prickly. He doesn't light up the room when he walks in like Sean McVay. He's not that guy. He's just more like football acumen.
And I think that if that's the reason, then we have nothing to worry about. We also heard the same thing, though, about the Ryan brothers, right? They don't look like a CEO. They don't look like a head coach, and that's why they got passed over. And then when they got in those positions, they weren't able to act like a CEO, which is a lot of what a head coach has to do. That's the only reason I have a little bit of caution with Vic Fangio, but everything we've heard from him, everything we've seen, I like.
Yeah, one of the interesting things is when Gary Kubiak was the offensive coordinator here, back in my days and right after I retired, when the Houston Texans first came onto the scene, they wanted to hire – Charlie Casserly was the GM. He was a GM in Washington when I played in Washington. So Charlie Casserly calls me and says, hey, we're going to interview Gary Kubiak. This is kind of what we're looking for. Can you call Coobs and kind of, give him the rundown? So I call Coobs and we talk about it. So Coobs goes there and he gets bypassed by Dom Capers, is who they hire the first time. And Charlie really wanted to hire Gary Kubiak. But Gary Kubiak, in his interview process, wasn't demonstrative enough, wasn't, rah-rah enough, wasn't what he was. Gary's who he is. And, and so bottom line, when they ended up firing Dom Capers, Casserly called me again and said, hey, listen, this is the guy I want to hire. Can you make sure, when he walks in here, can you talk to him about just kind of selling himself a little bit more than he did before? Whether he did that or not doesn't matter. The point being is sometimes you get passed by, not because you don't have football knowledge, because the owners have been duped into believing that Sean McVay, if you don't get the Sean McVay guy, like that's the guy that's going to change your franchise. And that's just not it's just not factual. It's guys that have command of a football team, guys that instantly have respect, guys that like none of us care about getting chewed out or yelled at or screamed at or told we're terrible. As long as I know that you're coaching me and trying to make me the best player I can be, you can say anything you want about me. And so there's just sometimes the owners are just looking for that guy to walk through and really sell himself, and sometimes that guy, oftentimes that guy's not the right guy.
Well, and I look at it like also, why did it take Vic Fangio to so long to get a head coaching job? We'll see. We'll see how he does. But I think John needs a guy like Vic. He needs that type of coach, not a guy that he feels like he can just kind of walk all over, a guy that's going to give him some pushback. I think that's why him and Gary Kubiak work so well together. Obviously, they're good buddies, but Gary can look at him and say, John, you're crazy. No, where most coaches would be like, okay, John, what do you want me to do? That's fine, whatever you want to do. I just like to be the head coach. He needs somebody to give him a little pushback when he's, doing something that he shouldn't be doing or going down a road that he shouldn't be going down and to kind of put him in check. And that's hard for a lot of people to do. I mean, that's John Elway. But obviously Gary Kubiak could do that. I think Vic Fangio could do that also. And we're getting a RamosLaw.com text here. Took years for Bruce Arians to get a job. Same type of thing. He didn't look the part. He was in Pittsburgh forever, then went to Indy and got the interim role there when Chuck Pagano had the cancer.
Right.
And he did a great job,
right.
And that's the only reason he got the job. And he obviously did really well in Arizona, now in Tampa Bay. But I think it's a good fit for John Elway, and John needs a guy like Vic Fangio.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that because we never sensed that dynamic with Vance. And not that it was, all on Vance. It's just the dynamic at play. You have this young coach who was a young-time DC, understands that this is John's baby. And I agree with you. It's almost like you want your wife to challenge you. Like you don't want to have to walk. You don't walk over your wife. You want that equal. And I know that's not the same parallel here, but Vic Fangio.
Not touching that one.
It almost seems like when he was there on the stage with John, they're looking at each other as equals. If not, almost John having almost a bit of reverence.
John knows he needs him, right? John needs a head coach to be successful, and so I think the process that he's been through, he realizes that he needs a guy that he can work well with.
Well, and we saw that already, right? When they were trying to figure out who's going to be the offensive coordinator and put together that staff.
Good call.
We all thought it was going to be Gary Kubiak, and then it was, we're going to bring back Rick Dennison. And at some point, Vic Fangio said, no, I've waited a long time for this job. That's not the crew I'm going to go to battle with, and he was willing to draw a line in the sand. I thought that was a very positive sign that he would say, nope, that's not how we're going to do things around here. That was what we never saw with VJ.
It's a great call, and if you remember Vance's staff, half of his staff were holdovers. I mean, they were from the previous regime, like literally half of it. So we all kind of agree that the Broncos are heading in the right direction with their coach. Are they heading in the right direction organizationally?
Here's what I want to say. I'm going to go back, and then I'll touch on that. When you hire a guy like Fangio, it's not just the fact of John wanting someone to push back against him. He wanted someone day one who can walk into that room, and all those guys can actually respect it. I mean, Coach Fangio said earlier that Vaughn is going to be doing some things this season that he's never done before, which bothers a lot of people when you're talking about taking an elite pass rusher and dropping him back in coverage. And he also said that Vaughn has a lot to learn. And you're thinking at this point, this stage in Vaughn's career, what more does he have to learn? But that is coming from a guy who has years of experience as a defensive coordinator, breaking down film, breaking down players, knowing how to put players in the right position to succeed. And that's what, this organization didn't have these past two seasons. I mean, it got to a point, and I don't want to, call people out, but it got to a point where some of the players, didn't really respect Vance. They really didn't. And I can tell you as a former player, if I don't respect the scheme, I'm not buying into it. And most coaches always talk about the culture and buying into that culture. If I don't respect you as a head coach, I'm not going to be willing to go out there and play injured and play hurt or even listen to you. So that is what Fangio brings in, just like a Joe Flacco, just like Peyton did when he was here and why he was tops on your list. When you have a guy like that walk in the building right away, instant credibility based on his resume, and that's why they're buying into it.
And I think a lot of this moving forward, to your point of challenging Vaughn, it's about the follow-through of actually doing it, because lest we forget, one of the first things that Vance Joseph said when he showed up, do you remember what he said? we need more from DT. We need 88 to be dominant at all times. And at the time, it was like, whoa, Vance came in here. He's challenging this all-pro receiver. But the actual practice and follow-through of holding these guys accountable, and that word accountable probably was something that was seriously missing, judging by the context clues over the last couple years.
There was no repercussions if Von Miller jumped offside for the 4th time in 2 games. It was just, there was no consequence to it, right? And you played, with Shannon Sharp, and Mike Shanahan came in here and said, look, he's a great pass catcher, but if he doesn't block, he's not going to play. And he was willing to, hold true to that thread.
Beyond that, he said if he didn't practice, which Shannon was
always had a nick.
Always had a nick. Didn't practice. So you don't practice, you don't get to play for me. Vaughn. I sat down and met with Vaughn before I called the Rams game and asked him. I said, "Dude, you're driving me crazy." Like Vaughn and I are tight. And Vaughn's great because Vaughn will take it and Vaughn will absorb it and go, "Yeah, you're right. I can be better at that." Like if you challenge Vaughn is very self-aware of where he's at. And I was like, "You're jumping off sides. As a fan, it drives me crazy." And he goes, "Hey man, I'm coached better than that. They coach me. I'm coached better, but you still do it." You know what I mean? And you're like, "Well, Vaughn," and I think those are the things that will get cleaned up under a coach that you respect more.
We are live here, Training Camp 2019 Road to Redemption War Room. Big shout out to Brothers Barbecue, who always does a tremendous job with their spreads. Everyone's eating high off the hog here today because of those guys, locally owned and operated, do a terrific job. This is like the 10th time that they've done this. So huge shout out to Brothers Barbecue, doing a tremendous job of catering here today, and they can cater your next party. So give them a shout. We have not talked about what I believe may be the most important topic with the Denver Broncos in 2019. It's been an issue. Is it still an issue? We'll take a dive into it next. All right, we're live here. Training Camp 2019 Road to Redemption War Room, presented by Brothers Barbecue. Appreciate those guys. As we are heading to break, and again, to my right, Mark Schlereth, Brandon Stokely. To my left, Nick Ferguson and James Marilat. Before we went to break, I said the topic that we're going to broach here is, in my mind, maybe right at the top of the list in terms of priorities and sense of urgency for the Denver Broncos. And that is getting this offense out of the mud. It has been years here where the Broncos, in terms of points per game, 4 consecutive years, in fact, that the Broncos have been bottom third in the NFL. Just hasn't been good. And we were just talking about the coaches that, James, you said the Broncos zigged when everyone else zagged. Where they did not do that, and they did hire the guy who had the scent of a guy that they can't hire, is Rich Scangarello. You talk about a guy who is unproven. His Wikipedia page is 2 sentences long. 3 years ago, he was coaching in the Northeast Conference for Wagner. You're trying to slow down Duquesne, okay?
It's a powerhouse. This is easy on Wagner.
This is a lot different than that. This is a lot different than that. He was quality control coach, and he has this meteoric rise, and now he's the offensive coordinator for a team that needs to figure it out. James, we'll start with you at that end of the table this time. Your thoughts about Rich Scangarello having the burden of this laid at his feet?
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing that's worrisome. I think they're kind of hoping a little bit of Kyle Shanahan has rubbed off on him, and there's some osmosis there, kind of like the McVay thing, right, where anybody who's had coffee with Sean McVay, they want to interview and they want to hire him. Same kind of thing happening here with Kyle Shanahan. I do think that they're also putting a lot of faith in Mike Munchak. Like, he's sort of the experienced guy on that side of the ball. I know he'll bring that to the table, but he's not going to be the miracle worker that everybody thinks he's going to be, right? Like, you can be the greatest coach in the world if you don't have talent to work with, and that offensive line is full of question marks. It's going to be an uphill battle. So. Yeah, you're right. That's a meteoric rise. That's a guy who's, we were all worried about Vance Joseph had only done it for 1 year as a DC in Miami. This is a guy with probably even less experience. So that's going to be a big leap. And they don't really have anybody else other than Munchak to fall back on, right? The head coach is a defensive-minded guy. There's not someone else on that staff that you think, well, if it's not working out early, he can lean in this direction. I don't know where they go if Scangarello is grasping at straws early. That's going to be interesting to watch.
Nick Ferguson from the Safety Blitz. You have a little bit of experience with Rich Scangarello, do you not?
Yeah, I do. We were on the same coaching staff last year, and I know that's a big question mark. First-time play caller. Very difficult to do. I've watched several coaches struggle with that, and that was kind of a chore even for, seasoned guy like Kyle. Because, situations change. You face different opponents week in and week out. So that's kind of a huge question mark. But looking at the way that the Broncos team has been put together, it's sort of similar to what we faced in San Francisco last year. I mean, George Kittle, he ripped the defense apart, right? And Kyle pulled back. He didn't continue to, utilize George Kittle in the passing game. So when you look at where we were at that time when the Broncos played us and where the team is right the days before the start of training camp, it is heavy tight end dominated, right? We have a young wide receiver core here in Denver, and we have one of the top receivers on the team coming off an Achilles injury. And you now, putting all your hopes on Courtland Sutton that he can be either the number one guy if needed to be, or he can be the complement to Emmanuel Sanders. So it's kind of the same situation we were in then, but I do have a lot of confidence in Scangarello because there are some ties to Mike Shanahan. And Kyle proved last year that, he's a smart coach. We didn't have all the weapons, and I was telling James right before we started is, we didn't have a lot of weapons in San Francisco. Scangarello has a lot to play with. You have three options at the running back position. All offseason we've been talking about, Philip Lindsay. Is he going to come back from that wrist injury, and how was he going to do it? You draft Noah Fant. You have Jake Butt. You have Jeff Hyman. A lot of those guys don't have a lot of experience, but seeing as though the tight end position has been elevated to a whole different level. They're called tight ends, but let's call them what they really are, wide receivers. So you have multiple personnel groupers, and I've heard Mark talk about it all the time. They're going to run the same play out of the same, personnel grouping, right, all the time to see how disciplined you are from a defensive perspective. So this could be an offense that look entirely different from what we saw last year. It's going to look really different from what we saw last year with the San Francisco 49ers, but there are more weapons that Scangarello can actually utilize.
Stoke, Rich Scangarello.
I'm so much more concerned with him than Vic Fangio. I look at Vic and I feel comfortable. He hasn't been a head coach, but I feel comfortable with him. Rich Scangarello, who knows? This guy, he's leading that group offensively. We know the struggles that we've had offensively. Now, he's got more players than the past couple years, more weapons to use, but the newness of him and the responsibility that he has and what we need for him to do to get this thing back heading in the right direction, I have a lot more concern with him than I do with Vic Fangio. So for me, if you're lining up the storylines, Rich Scangarello is at the top of the list. How is he going to perform? What is this offense going to look like? And like James said, who does he have to lean on? Sometimes with a young guy, you want that veteran coach to lean on the offensive side of the football. You have Mike Munchak, but we don't think of Mike Munchak as an offensive play caller. I don't know if he's ever called offensive plays or not, but that's not what we think of Mike Munchak. So if he would have had somebody like that on the staff to be able to lean on with experience, I think that would have helped. But for me, it's a big concern, Rich Scangarello and his inexperience.
I'm with you. It is a concern. Like, one thing in this offense, they will personnel group you to death. And most teams now are in sub-package 65, 70% of the time. When you call a game or when you're watching football, they're in three rides, one tight, one back. They'll spread. They'll do all those things out of that. You're going to see two tights, two backs, one tight, two backs, one back, two tights. You're going to see a bunch of different personnel groupings. They're going to come in and out. They're going to make you as a defense declare what you're going to be in. That's this offense. My concern is this. It's stacking plays, stacking concepts, setting plays up, like creating plays in the first quarter that you're going to expose a defense, watching what a defense and how they play you. How are we going to set up the play action off of this? The other thing that concerns me is when you watch Kyle Shanahan or you meet with Kyle Shanahan, Kyle wants to get the play in and get running the play at about 20, 22 seconds. Why does he want to do that? Because they have a can it principle. So what that means is everything they run is based off of 2 plays called in the huddle. So they'll have a play called, and then they'll have a can it principle with that play, meaning if we get the look that we want, we run the play that's called. If we don't, we can it, and we get to the secondary play that we want to run. I played in Washington with a first-time offensive coordinator named Rod Dahauer. And I can't tell you how many times we got the play in with 4 seconds left because he couldn't make a decision on what he wanted to play. It's impossible to play offense like that. Like, you can't. You rushing up the line of scrimmage. You can't get your keys. You can't look at safety rotation. You can't look at linebackers that are in bad positions. You can't get yourself ready. And all of a sudden, you got to snap the ball right now. Makes it very difficult. Like, we like to get up to the line of scrimmage, and you want to see leverage, what kind of corner leverage you've got, what kind of safety leverage. Like, if I see linebackers that have shifted one side or another, like if a guy's out of position as an offensive lineman, I see this middle linebacker that's bossed over strong, then I know, hey, man, they're going to have weak safety rotation. I mean, it's just almost 100%, right? And so if I'm in my stance, I can look at all that stuff and I go, okay, now I know, man, I'm going to get a pinch, or I'm going to – you start to think that way as an offensive player. You get the ball with 4 seconds left and you snap it, like you can't absorb all the information that you want to absorb before you actually play the game. And so that's my concern of never calling plays before, stacking concepts, attacking people based upon what they've given you in the first couple of quarters, and then getting the plays in on time, understanding kind of where you're going. And like that takes time.
Yeah, I mean, like adjustments throughout the course of the game.
Right.
How is he going to do halftime adjustments? Are a big deal in the NFL. This is what they're going. This is what we're going to start going with. What will he look like, at halftime, third quarter, fourth quarter?
Now, I love the fact that he wanted so much to be in Kyle Shanahan's system that he basically walked away from a good college job to sleep on a couch.
He did.
And not get paid.
He did.
I love his story. Like, his story is incredible. But like Joe Woods was swimming last year at times as the first-time kind of play caller on the defensive side of the ball, to the point where Vance Joseph took over some of the play-calling duties on the defensive side. I'm not saying that will happen. I'm just saying that there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve here when it comes to play-calling duties.
Shout out to Brothers Barbecue. Local guys, founded and company-owned right here in Denver for the last 2 decades. They have 7 different Denver metro locations, from Castle Rock to Broomfield. Hit them up at brothers-bbq.com. We have new information on a Bronco that may be the most important player to this offense. Details next. Mark Schlereth, Brandon Stokely, Nick Ferguson, James Marilat to the left and right of me. Guys, I want to pass some information along. It's about a question that we have asked throughout this offseason. Emmanuel Sanders, of course, tears the Achilles tendon, misses the last quarter of the 2018 season. This is on the heels of, I believe it was an ankle that he missed the last quarter of the 2017 season. It's a big year for Emmanuel. He's posted some videos. It's looked promising physically. He looks to be on point. But quotes from Nikki Javala coming out within the last 45 minutes or so. She says, Emmanuel Sanders says he's, quote, definitely not going to be full go from the jump, end quote, in training camp, and isn't sure if he'll participate in the conditioning test tomorrow, Wednesday. Said they'll gradually work him back to full. Quote, I want to be ready for week 1, end quote. Stoke, your reaction?
Perfect. I'm great with that. No need to rush him back out there. Obviously a serious injury. He looked great in that little video that he posted, but he hadn't had pads on. He hadn't practiced football since that injury, and you don't just want to throw him back out there first day of training camp. So there needs to be a plan, a process with him, and get him back into football shape. He doesn't need to participate in the conditioning test. I saw him running around. He looks great. And so just continue to condition him, get him ready to go, and have a nice plan in place, and maybe he pops back in and plays, in 1 preseason game, maybe 2, and get him ready, like you said. Get him ready for week 1. That's when it matters the most. That's when we need him the most. You certainly don't want any kind of setback with Emmanuel Sanders. He's very, very valuable to this offense.
And speaking of that value, Stink, outside of the quarterback position, Joe Flacco, is Emmanuel Sanders the most important player for this offense?
It's a great question. There are so many question marks on this offense, but he is one of the most dynamic guys, can run anything, plays tough, has separation type speed, bounces back when he gets hit. He does all those things. So I think he's a huge piece to the puzzle. Also, to take pressure off the other side. I mean, and you think about it, if you don't have Emmanuel Sanders, the depth of this receiving core is not good. And now all of a sudden you take a young Courtland Sutton and say, hey, you got to be our number one. And you're going to draw either, if a lot of these teams will put the number one corner on, like the Rams will put your Aqib Talib on you, or if it's the Patriots, they'll put their number two corner on you and roll a safety over the top if you're the number one, depending on how they deem your guys and how they want to game plan those things. But I think there's a lot of pressure on Emmanuel Sanders to be great. And I'm glad they're taking this approach because they need to take this approach. One of the things the players did in the last collective bargaining agreement was, oftentimes we are, as players, our own worst enemies. They negotiated, no practice, no hitting, no OTA, physical contact out of the CBA. So we've got these $50 million facilities that you can't go use in the offseason. Like, that makes no sense to me, right? So now you go and you train like a track athlete for 3 months, and then all of a sudden you start practicing, and Stoke, you've been running routes on air and you feel great and you're running fast, and all of a sudden some DB jams you in the chest and starts leaning on you and pushing you down the field, and you haven't developed any kinesthetic awareness of
first time having full pads
right.
on also.
I mean, it's a difference. So we don't actually off season, because of the collective bargaining agreement, train like football players. We train like track athletes. So taking a guy like Philip Lindsay or taking a guy like Emmanuel Sanders and easing them through this process to get them into quote-unquote football shape is the smartest thing you can do as an organization. But it's a real epidemic. It's a real issue. And I talk to teams, all the time about that transition and how difficult it is right now to get guys ready to play, simply because we can't do it in the off season anymore.
And quick sidebar, among the Schlerithisms, kinesthetic awareness is right there in the Hall of Fame. I truly love it. James, at the other end of the table, Emmanuel Sanders. I'll ask you the same question I just asked Mark. Is Emmanuel Sanders, outside of the quarterback position, the most important member of this offense if this thing's going to get back on track?
Without a doubt. We saw it last year. When he went out, they were 6-6, had a chance to make the playoffs. They go 0-4, and averaged, I think it was 13 points a game in the last 4 weeks. Now, it's not all just because Emmanuel Sanders wasn't there, but that was the biggest missing piece. It was the biggest change. That offense wasn't good before that. It was dreadful once he was gone. And really, he's the only known commodity. I mean, we all like Courtland Sutton. We all like Philip Lindsay. We all like Noah Fant. We all think, hey, these guys could be, good NFL players and can be dynamic. But we don't really know it. We probably know it more about Philip Lindsay than anybody else. And look at his production late in the year. He started to tail off when people kind of figured him out, and when it was, hey, he's their best offensive weapon, we need to take away Philip Lindsay, it wasn't very hard to take him away. So, Emmanuel Sanders has to be out there. He makes everybody else better. He's going to make Courtland Sutton better. He's going to make the running game better. If I'm Joe Flacco or I'm Rich Gangarello and I got to call plays for the first time, and I'm looking out here and I don't have Emmanuel Sanders and I got all these unknown commodities to work with, That's terrifying isn't the right word, but boy, that's an uphill battle.
Nick Ferguson, you got a big smile on your face. Tell me why.
Because I'm listening to you guys talk about Emmanuel Sanders being a key cog in the wheel for this team, and I feel entirely different because Mark, he knows this. The game is won and lost in the trenches. You just said outside of Joe Flacco, who's the most important player. How about the guy snapping him the ball and Connor McGovern? Because if you can't get the ball from the quarterback, from the center to the quarterback, we don't even have to worry about talking about Emmanuel Sanders getting the ball. And we're talking about Connor McGovern, who was a guard, who was forced to play center because due to injuries. Matt Paradis is no longer here. So you need someone to be the quarterback of your offense. That's your guy. I mean, he's the guy that relays the information to the guards who now give it to the tackles. So everyone's on the same page. There are 5 guys on the offensive line, but to me, they operate as one. You have to be on the same page. You just talk about the running game. The running game is the best friend of a quarterback, is it not? But if you can't snap the ball, you can't get these guys to block and pick up blitzes, what are we even talking about?
So are you just to be clear, are you telling me Connor McGovern is more important to this offense than Emmanuel Sanders?
Yes, exactly. Because
are you saying Connor McGovern, we got to worry about him snapping the ball? Like, if they're worried about that kind of nuts and bolts basics, we got all sorts of problems.
But listen, last year, McGovern had the problem, right? Most teams, when they faced him, they knew that he was a first-time guard. He was a guard playing center for the first time. So if we want to run double A-gap blitzes, guess where we're going with right over him? Because now he has to snap. He has to get his hands up, and now we're talking about that pre-snap communication. It wasn't there, but if you can't do that adequately, whether the guy's Flacco's on the center or he's in the shotgun, that's a problem because offense, Stoke, you know this, it's timing, it's rhythm, getting the ball out of your hand, and Joe Flacco is not a very mobile quarterback. So that timing, that rhythm, that's the first thing that you need to have, timing and rhythm with that quarterback and that center exchange.
Any reaction to what you just heard from Nick Ferguson?
I'm trying to wrap my head around it still, and that's not unusual. But
take your time.
I can't. Obviously, I can't agree with him there. Obviously, if you have a Pro Bowl left tackle, okay, yeah, that guy's really important. A center position, I think, if you put a guy like, Mark Schlereth next to the center, he can cover up a lot of flaws from the center. I mean, getting the ball back to the quarterback, that's elementary. That goes without saying. If you're playing NFL and you're a starting center, you got to be able to make the snap every single time without even thinking about it. And with Mcgovern last year was a little bit of an issue, like you said, because he hadn't played center. He's the guy this year, so he's getting those reps, all through the offseason and in the training camp. So it should be a lot different. But I think if you say who would I rather, lose this year or not have this year, we can replace the center. We can't replace Emmanuel Sanders.
It just feels like Emmanuel is, and James referenced the stretch of time without Emmanuel. I don't want to even imagine what this looks like because, Mark, you sort of hit on this, and I'll just say this. I'm a little bit higher than the depth of our receivers than you are, but I think we can agree when Emmanuel Sanders wasn't in the picture last year, the offense was a wet noodle.
Well, sure, because the thing you know about football is the complementary nature of football and how we all have to rely on one another, and that goes beyond offense to defense and special teams and how all that works in unison, and it goes beyond the complementary nature when you don't have a receiver that's busting one-on-one coverage on a consistent basis and you already have a weakness of your offensive line. And I'll take Nick's point even further. Connor McGovern, I look at this whole offensive line, and there are question marks across the – can Garrett Bowles become a player? Dalton Reisner just signed his deal. He got a 4-year, $7 million deal to play left guard. Connor McGovern's a guy that, is to me – He was a guy that last year, moving into whether it was guard or center, I thought he was just a guy. So he needs to improve as a football player. Ronald Leary had a back issue coming out of Dallas, had a knee issue for his first 2 years with the Broncos, then tore his Achilles, playing right guard for you. And Juwan James is a very talented athlete that comes from Miami that happens to have probably the worst culture in the NFL, and I can tell just watching film on him that he's smart. He understands angles. He understands where his help is. And the culture he came from is 1,001, 1,002, and I am done. And he gave up so many late hits and so many late pressures because he did not finish plays. Now, I think Mike Munchak can fix that, but you're talking about 5 different things that you have to, think that you're gonna create some unison up front, because as Nick said, he's 100% right. It's 5 that are 1. Like, you've got to play that way to be good up front. So, I think that's a bigger issue in the overall scheme of things. But from a dynamic nature, I think Emmanuel is huge for this team.
This is an interesting conversation that we're about to peel back the onion here a little bit. And James, you sort of touched on it. When we talk about this offense, what do we actually know? What is the most known thing that you have confidence in on that entire side of the football? We'll get to that, but first, what's up with that Denver snapshot? And we are on the road to redemption. You can't find a more appropriate moniker to go by than trying to get this thing redeemed. here after the last couple years, 3 years consecutively missing the playoffs, 2 years consecutively losing seasons and picking in the top 10. If the Broncos are going to figure it out, guys, they have to score points. That's the name of the game, right? It seems like the league is evolving to an even further level that the Broncos seem just a little bit stuck in the past. But when we talk about what we know for this offense, we have a new quarterback, questions about the offensive line, questions about our most dynamic receiver's health. He says he feels great, but missed quarter of a season, each of the last 2 coming off a major injury. We talk about Noah Fant, first-round pick. The history of guys coming in the league at that position and having a ton of success just isn't there. I believe only 3 in the history of the game over 700 yards as a rookie at the tight end spot. We have a Pro Bowl running back who's coming off an injury that didn't participate this offseason. Courtland Sutton, questions about whether he can go from year 1 to year 2 or even be a number 1 if we need him to. When we talk about what's known, I just threw out a bunch of question marks for you. What are you guys reasonably confident in that you can point to something? James, we'll start with you. We can point to something on the offensive side of the ball and say, man, I know we have a bunch of question marks, but I feel really good about this.
It's a guy we've never seen play a game in orange and blue. It's Joe Flacco. Like, you know what you're going to get out of Joe Flacco.
Oh.
You may not love what you're going to get out of Joe Flacco. Well, maybe not 100%, but I think he's closer to 100% than a lot of those other guys you mentioned. Like, you know, he's a guy with a big arm. He's a guy that, you know, at 34 years old, he's been in the league for a decade. He knows how to read defenses. He knows what's coming, you know, what's going to come at him. You know, not a super mobile guy. Like, we're not going to go down there on Thursday and watch practice for the first time and be shocked by what we see out of Joe Flacco. We know what we're going to get. He's a big-armed, big quarterback that primarily is going to throw from the pocket. I think every other spot on the field and in the coaching booth is a question mark. That offense is nothing but questions. Joe Flacco's maybe a slight one because he's new here, but we've seen him play that position, seen him play at a relatively high level, win a Super Bowl MVP in this league for 10 years. He's the most known commodity on that offense.
Stoke, you were giving him pushback.
Yeah, I can't go there with you with Joe Flacco because I look at him and say, okay, what are we going to get here in Denver from Joe Flacco? Is he on the tail end of his career, and we're going to get a Joe Flacco that's a shell of himself? You know, that's kind of packed it in with the NFL, and it you know, left his stuff in Baltimore. Is just going to go and not be that same quarterback that we saw, you know, that he could be in Baltimore. So to me, that's a big unknown in this type of system with a new coordinator, new pieces all around him. Like, what Joe Flacco are we going to get? Is he done, or is he like John said, in the prime of his career? So to me, that's a huge unknown. And everything across the board, I don't know if there's one known. I mean, Philip Lindsay, he's an unknown still. He's got to do it again. He's got to prove that he can back up the rookie year, that it wasn't a one-year fluke. I mean, our tight end position is, you know, we're going to be counting on Jake Butt, Jeff Hireman, and a rookie. I mean, those guys are unknowns. Offensive line, all across the board, big question marks. Receivers, Emmanuel Sanders coming off the Achilles, Courtland Sutton, did nice job his rookie year, but I mean, can he do it again? And can he take that next step as the number 2 wide receiver? So I guess the one maybe unknown, or if I had to say one, would be our right tackle, Juwan James. You know, that he's going to be a really good player over there, but you know, can he live up to that contract? Probably not, but that would be it. Other than, I mean, I'd just say, look, everything to me right now on the offense, every single spot and every single player is a question mark.
Stink, is there any portion of this offense or player?
I think you accidentally just agreed with James.
That's what I was kind of thinking.
Well,
I didn't want to chime in. I already had my time.
No. He said Joe Flacco.
I know everything's unknown that Joe Flacco's the most known.
He's the default answer, right?
I'm not going with that. I'm saying nobody.
Okay, well, that was my thought was when the most known commodity, unless you want to say the most known commodity is Garrett Bowles, he's going to have 10 to 12 holding calls a game.
We're talking about good stuff, though.
Okay,
not the bad stuff.
So then I'm going to go Joe Flacco. You know, the one thing I know is Joe Flacco thrived in this offense in 2014. Joe Flacco played really well up until he had the hip injury last year for the Baltimore Ravens. Actually beat the Denver Broncos in a Week 4 matchup. And, you know, I called the game in Baltimore the first time in Joe Flacco's career that he was a healthy scratch, that he was healthy enough to play and he didn't start a game. First time in his NFL career, and it hurt him to the core. Like you could tell. I talked to him about it. It hurt him. And I feel like that motivation, like we've all been there. I mean, I was told by the Washington Redskins that you can't play anymore. Like, it drives me and pisses me off to this day. It's still a driving factor. Like, you don't get to this level without being a type A, just uber competitive dude, right? And so I look at that as a good thing. You were told by your organization that you won a Super Bowl MVP with and that you play great with, that this guy who doesn't know how to throw is a better option for us than you. And let me just tell you, Lamar Jackson's a great kid, and that running game was like nothing I'd ever seen before. That running game in Baltimore was mind-boggling how good that running game is. That kid, like that kid is literally, like, I'm watching him play and I'm like, are you sure you're right-handed? You are that bad throwing the football. And it's shocking how bad he was. Now, will he improve? Gosh, I hope so. But that is not a sustainable, like, if that doesn't improve dramatically, that's not a sustainable offense in Baltimore. Like, that's going to get that whole staff fired, making that decision. And you're Joe Flacco, and that's what you lost out to? Like, if I'm Joe, I'm pissed, and I got something to prove. So to me, he's the biggest known commodity for me.
I definitely have to agree, and I find it very comical. Listening to Stoke give his, comments about.
Whoa! It's getting hot now. Yeah,
comical.
Keep going.
Give his comments about Joe Flacco. And I'm just going to piggyback off of what Mark was saying. When we look at Joe Flacco, and not so many people are giving him a lot of credit, and Stokely being one of those individuals. Let's just take a look at Joe Flacco being a part of the Baltimore Ravens, right? Mark actually mentioned the year that he had a great year. Gary Kubiak was the offensive coordinator. They threw a lot of passes to the tight end position. Kyle Juszczyk was part of that, the fullback. He was kind of a pass-catching fullback out of the backfield. And the Broncos have to find that now with Scangarello, but let's not really throw Flacco under the bus, because he had 4 different offensive coordinators. He had wide receivers, right? Some were great, some were not. When you look at Torrey Smith. He was just a one-trick pony. The vertical route, he couldn't run every route on the passing tree, right? And then you look at the run game after Ray Rice. What did he have? Alex Collins, who had a couple of consistent games. So when we look at Joe Flacco's overall production, it did go down because he didn't really have those players around him, and the offensive scheme seemed to change every year or every 2 years, to his credit. Now, back to Stokely, and I guess attacking Joe Flacco. Right?
I'm not attacking Joe Flacco.
Yes, you are.
I'm just stating the facts. Those are the facts.
Are they really the facts?
The facts are he's a big unknown here.
You're basing that off of what we've seen up to this point, and going back to what Mark was saying. It was the Baltimore Ravens going with this trend, wanting to find one of those RPO quarterbacks. That's why Lamar Jackson is there. He's not a better passer. He's a better athlete than Joe Flacco. That's the only reason that happened.
And he was drafted in the first round.
And the reason, why was he drafted in the first round? Because Joe was injured, right? That started that trend. So listening to everyone talk about Joe Flacco as though he wasn't a Super Bowl MVP, and that, guess what? He emptied the tank. There's nothing left. To me, that's utterly ridiculous. Well, and that's why when you were talking, I was sitting there. I'm like, I can't wait, because this is so hilarious.
Well, the question was the unknown here. And for me, Joe Flacco is a big unknown here because, once again, this is a new system for him. Maybe he played in this type of system with Gary Kubiak, but it's a different system under Rich Scangarello / Kyle Shanahan, and the way that offense is run now than what he had in 2013 or 14 with Gary Kubiak. So this is another new offense for him. So for me, what are we going to see from a 34-year-old Joe Flacco going into year 12 or 13? What is it going to look like? New team, new coordinator, new system, all of these different changes for him. Yes, he's got nice weapons and maybe better weapons than he's ever had, but it's still an unknown, and I'm not. Don't say I'm down on Joe, though. I'm not down on Joe. I think he's an upgrade, but still, to me, he's an unknown.
Let me just say this: after hearing what each of you guys have said for the last 10 minutes, it's striking me as the more things change, the more they stay the same, with one particular dynamic, And I'll tell you exactly what it is next. Yes, we are live in the War Room Training Camp 2019 Road to Redemption. And as we were going into the break, I said, I'm listening to you guys, internalizing what you guys are saying about the offensive side of the football. And I said, the more things change, the more they say the same in one specific dynamic. And what I'm talking about, as some of you may have guessed, is that it feels like, although there has been a lot of change, and in fact with the Broncos, I think they have undertaken the most change of any team in all of football. New head coach, new OC, new DC, new QB, new RT, new center, new guard, right? All across the board. But the one dynamic, after listening to you guys, feels like still at play here in Denver is that if the Broncos are going to continue on this road to redemption and say be a 10-6 football team, they're once again, for about the fifth or however many years it is, they're going to lean so heavily on their defense to be great. It just doesn't seem like the offense, although we're optimistic, it doesn't seem like there's tangible reliability there, James Merrill.
Well, it's the opposite of what we just talked about with the offense, right? If you look on the defensive side of the ball, there's 6 or 7 guys where you go, we know what we're going to get. You know what you're going to get from Vaughn and Bradley Chubb and Derek Wolfe and even a guy like Shelby Harris who's new in the middle of that defensive line. We've seen them do it. We know what we're going to get. New cornerbacks that are coming in and new safeties. Like, yeah, but we've seen them play at this level. And, nothing's ever 100% sure, but there's a reasonable expectation. So they're like the mirror image of the offense. The offense is nothing but question marks. The defense, I know Vic Fangio and that staff is different, but, again, there's another guy we've seen do it at a high level and have some really, really good defenses in this league. So that group I expect to be good, and I expect them to be good from the jump, and they're going to have to be. I mean, the Broncos traditionally start the year pretty hot. Playing home games here certainly helps early in the year. If they're able to do that again and get off to a hot start, it's going to be in low-scoring games. I mean, the best offensive player on this team is their kicker. That should have been the question to that earlier, or the answer to that earlier question is that's the one guy you know something about, Brandon McManus. Other than that, it's nothing but question marks. The defense, whole other deal. That's a group you can rely on.
Can I ask Nick a question from his to lean on his coaching expertise and his knowledge there? So one of the things that you come to realize when you're breaking down these games is how quick the ball is out of everybody's hands and how dominant the underneath passing game has become. And one of the things that I see consistently is teams that have linebackers that can run and tackle, like they eliminate a lot of that underneath passing game. And when you broke down the Chicago Bears, they probably played base to more sub-package looks, more nickel looks than any other team I watched. So they've got 2 linebackers in Roquan Smith and Danny Trevathan that can run like the wind, great tacklers. I mean, they can go curl to flat, and if you dump it off the flat, they'll rally up there from 12 yards deep and tackle you for a 1 or 2 yard gain. And that to me is a huge advantage when you start breaking out as an offense in a zebra package, in a 3 wides package, and all of a sudden, you're trying to get them to change personnel groupings so you can cram it down somebody's throat and get a matchup, a guard on a small safety type of guy. And Chicago never had to do that last year. So I guess my question to you is the one weakness that I think is glaring to me here is the middle linebacker position for the Denver Broncos. And can what you've seen from those 2 guys, can they play that? Or are they going to have to sub out? Is it going to change some of what Vic Fangio would like to do or what he was able to do, I guess, more importantly, last year?
Yeah, I mean, for Chicago, they had 2 guys in Trevathan and Roquan Smith. Fast linebackers, great in the pass game, great against the run. Here in Denver, we don't have that, right? It would have been great to keep Brandon Marshall because he would have been a great fit for this defense. But now you have Todd Davis and Josie Jules. Of those 2 guys, I'll go with Todd Davis. Josie Jules will probably be one of those guys who's probably going to be subbed out. Because now we're talking about Sua Cravens, who now plays safety. Maybe they bring him down and put him as an extra athletic defender who can now match up with tight ends but still effective in the run. That's another reason why a guy like Kareem Jackson was brought here. And we're trying to figure out, where's he going to play? Is he going to play outside? Is he going to play safety? Or he's going to be an extra linebacker, in the sub package. And with Coach Fangio, you like to have option. Like you said, there are more teams now that run 11 personnel, 3 wide receivers. Because the idea is when teams spread you out, you thinking that they want to pass the ball. No, teams spread you out because they want to run the ball. So you need more athletic guys on the field. So it is somewhat of a question mark, and you wonder which guy is going to elevate and raise their level of play. And when I look at the Broncos roster, this is great for a guy like Will Parks, a guy like Sua Cravens. You get extra reps, opportunities to be on the field. And Zach, you're right. This is a defensive-minded team. I mean, look at the head coach. Look at, why he was hired, what he was able to do, whether it was with the 49ers or the Chicago Bears. This defense, from a personnel standpoint, is similar to that of Chicago. Now, we have better guys in the secondary than Prince Amukamara and Kyle Fuller, right? But it is based on getting pressure. This defense, when I look at it, it starts and ends with Von Miller and Bradley Chubb. If something were to happen to either of those two guys, that changes the whole complexity of what Fangio wants to do with his defense. But this is the start of the training camp, so we're looking at with both of those guys being healthy. If they're healthy, now you could do so many things in the back end, and you don't really have to worry about issues with the linebacker position.
Stoke, the dynamic of the team, this has been sort of at play for years. We can recall Aqib Talib, shouting down Russell Okun and specific examples like that. But the Broncos here for about a half a decade have leaned on one side of the ball. Do you see that same sort of dynamic at play?
Absolutely. I think it's going to be let's run the football. Let's play not good defense. You better play great defense. And, Joe, make a few plays for us. Fourth quarter, third down plays. That's what we need from Joe Flacco. But I think overall it's going to be let's lean on our defense and let's rely on those guys to play great. I mean, if this team wants to get back to, a 10-win, some people say 12-win team. To me, if they want to get to 9 wins, the defense has got to play great. Great defense, not good defense, great defense. Yes, they're going to have to rely heavily on the defense.
And Stink, you sort of went a different direction, but do you still see that dynamic at play here?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, they're going to have to be great on the defense side. I mean, you've got 2 of the elite pass rushers in all of football. You got one of the elite corners in all of football. You've got to be great. You've got to lean on that. And you've got versatility in your secondary. Kareem Jackson's a really good football player. Bryce Callahan he was a great slot corner for Chicago last year. Not afraid to tackle. He does a lot of things well. I like Will Parks. Justin Simmons, right?
Yep.
Even Justin Simmons, you watch him. Go back 2 years ago when he had to line up and play corner in Miami. I called that game. And now he gave up a play on a double move that he got beat on because he just never practiced. I mean, he didn't get. But that's a guy that's athletic enough to say, "Hey, Kareem, we're going to play you at safety, and we're going to have Justin Simmons come down and play some corner for us." Like, he is that athletic. So they've got versatility back there. Like I said, Chicago is based out of what they were based out of as essentially a 5-2. They call it a 3-4, but it's a 5-2. They run 5 guys on the line of scrimmage. That middle linebacker position is the only thing that I really am a little bit leery about. But, yeah, I think their defense is going to have to be great for them, and they're going to have to lead the way again.
We're live here in the Fan War Room Training Camp 2019 Road to Redemption, sponsored by Brothers Barbecue. Local guys founded and company-owned right here in Denver, Colorado for the last 2 decades. They have 7 different Denver metro locations, from Castle Rock all the way to Broomfield. Brothers Barbecue offers full-service catering, and we're experiencing that right now. They have knocked it out of the park, and they also offer on-site grilling for all your summer events, delivering delicious smoked meats and handcrafted sides no matter where you are. Hit them up, brothers-bbq.com. Earlier in this war room, I asked you guys if the Broncos have found the right man at head coach. We've also been asking that same question about one position in particular, and I'll ask you guys that very question next. Going into the break, I asked you guys earlier in the show, I said, hey, have the Broncos finally found their guy at head coach? They've changed head coaches as often as anyone in the sport, but what they've done more often than anyone in the sport definitely is they've changed quarterbacks. You know, since Peyton Manning has walked out the door, guys who have started games for the Denver Broncos, Trevor Siemian, Brock Osweiler, Paxton Lynch, Case Keenum, and now Joe Flacco, and I think I'm forgetting someone in there. Did I? Well, regardless, they've changed quarterback a lot, and it seems like John Elway is taking one last stab at this thing before being forced to play a young draft pick again. Joe Flacco, and James will start at this end of the table. James Marilat, Nick Ferguson, Brandon Stokely, Mark Schlereth, all joining me here in the War Room. Is Joe Flacco? Are we being sold this bill of goods? No one nationally is high on Joe Flacco. No one nationally believes that Joe Flacco is going to lead this team back to the playoffs. Where are you at personally with this Joe Flacco experiment that's about to get started in 48 hours?
I think reality is somewhere in the middle, right? I think this national perspective that Joe Flacco can't play at all, I don't know where that comes from. I mean, he's a relatively accomplished NFL quarterback. I mean, again, we harp on it, but Super Bowl MVP, played in this league for more than 10 years, former first-round pick, all these things that you want on the resume that tell me, hey, you don't play that long, you don't start that many games if you can't play the position. I think the idea that he's going to come in here and this is the second coming of Peyton Manning in a second phase of his career, that's ridiculous as well. But he's a huge upgrade over what we've had. I mean, the preposterous notion that the Broncos were going to defend a Super Bowl championship with a guy who'd taken one snap and it was to take a knee. I mean, that level of quarterback play, the Paxton Lynch, the Brock Osweiler 2.0, the other guys we've seen come through here, Case Keenum, a career backup, that was being sold a bill of goods. A year ago right now when people were telling you that Case Keenum was the answer and he was going to solve all the problems and we finally have the right guy at the helm, that was a bill of goods. Joe Flacco's light years better than the guys they've had in here the last 3 or 4 years.
Nick?
Yeah, I like the addition of Joe Flacco. I went through all my supporting points when I talked about how ridiculous, Stokely was with his comments. And when I would look at this situation, John Elway knew a couple of things, especially after, Peyton Manning was here. I need a veteran quarterback. They tried to go out. And, Brock Osweiler was a guy. Paxton Lynch was a guy they moved up in the draft to get. And like James said, Case Keenum was a journeyman. He was a backup. Yeah, he had an excellent season with the Minnesota Vikings, but could he bring that with him here with the system being entirely different? So for John Elway, it was one of those rinse and repeat type of things. With a veteran quarterback, you can sell that to the fan base. You can sell that to the guys in the locker room because we go back to taking that guy, walking him in that locker room and say, well, this is our quarterback. The veterans in that room, they will be willing to jump on that bandwagon because they've seen this movie before. Now, what the outcome is going to look like, we don't know just yet. But at the very beginning, we know that Joe Flacco will give the Broncos a better chance than any of the previous quarterbacks. So this is a great move. Here's a guy who's played in the league a while. He's had several different offensive coordinators. He has a guy, like I said before, in Scangarello, who's calling plays for the first time. I have more power now to talk to my coordinator than I may have had in years prior to say, listen, these are the things that I like, right? My success depends on you and vice versa. If this situation, goes according to plan, now people are talking about me in a whole different light, the way they used to talk about me. You and Rich Scangarello, now they're looking at you as head coach material. We've seen this happen before. That's why Zach Taylor is now the head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals because he was with Sean McVay and Jared Goff, looking at the level of success that Jared Goff experienced in his second year. So I'm really high on Joe Flacco. I'm not down like most people. I really believe in him. And like Mark said earlier, when you have something that motivates you coming into camp, being as though you've been in this league a long time, to me, you're playing for something now. It's just like when he came out of Delaware and he was drafted by Baltimore, he was playing for a reason. You were a first-round pick. Now you're a first-round pick by the Denver Broncos. Now we need you to carry this team. Stoke,
is Joe Flacco a legitimate long-term option here that we may not even see Drew Lock play as quarterbacks play into their late 30s and early 40s now? Joe Flacco's only 34 years old. Could he be here 3-4 seasons from now?
He definitely could be. I think John would love if that was the case here where Joe Flacco plays the next 3 years here and is the starting quarterback. I think the perception around Joe Flacco is what it is, because when you look at today's NFL game, it's a passing game. You look at his stats, and obviously they run things a little bit different in Baltimore. They weren't asking him to go out there and throw the football 40, 50 times a game. So you look at his stats, and they don't blow you, off the page right away. I mean, they don't just jump off the page right away. I mean, you look at, 1 year he had over 4,000 yards passing.
That's
most ever touchdowns in his career, 27. So his stats don't blow you away. But at the same time, Joe Flacco was a product of the Baltimore Ravens and what they asked him to do, and I think that's what they're going to ask him to do here. Now the question is, what Joe Flacco are we going to get? Are we going to get the 2014 Joe Flacco where he was just under 4,000 yards, 27 touchdowns, 12 interceptions? Or are we going to get the Joe Flacco of 2 years ago where, it's 3,100 yards, 18 touchdowns, 13 interceptions? We need a little bit more than that. So where's Joe Flacco in his career? Is he in his prime, like John Elway said, or is he, on the downside of it? And that's one of the interesting, obviously, a big part of whether the Denver Broncos are going to be a successful team or not this year is what Joe Flacco are they going to get?
And a lot of that is answered to me by how does his offensive line play underneath Mike Munchak? How does Emmanuel Sanders health? How does Noah Fant? How does he come in here and play? How does your third wide receiver, whoever that might be, Deshaun Hamilton, how does he progress? How does Courtland Sutton? See, the quarterback position, we've all been as fans, we've all been influenced by this fantasy football kind of generation that we're in right now, and we all want to quantify everything by a number. And we're all looking for the unicorn to come in and play quarterback, right? We're looking for Pat Mahomes to come in and blow everybody away. And the unicorn doesn't exist. If you look at all the quarterbacks in the NFL, there are 3 or 4 guys out of 32. The Aaron Rodgers, the Pat Mahomes. There are those guys that can hoist a team on their back. The only quarterback in the history of the National Football League, now I'm talking the history of the National Football League, to have a winning record when he throws it over 50 times a game is Tom Brady? Every other guy, Joe Montana, Terry Bradshaw, go through a list of Hall of Fame quarterbacks. Every other guy, when he throws it 50-plus times, has a losing record. So most quarterbacks, 95% of them, have got to have a supporting cast. I called the game in Atlanta last year. You make a pretty compelling argument that may be the fastest team in football. When you start watching, Calvin Ridley, and you start watching Julio Jones, and you watch Tevin Coleman back in the day, and you watch the players that they have. I mean, Austin Hooper, they will, if they had a 4x100 track team, they would win the NFL 4x100. They've got all kinds of talent. You know what happened to them last year? They lost 3 of their starting offensive linemen. They were 7-9. Because Matt Ryan can't do it by himself. And he's a damn good quarterback. He was an MVP just 2 years ago.
I was going to say, and he threw for about 5,600 yards a year ago.
Yeah, so I'm just telling you that, I don't put that on Joe Flacco. I don't, and even when it comes to Pat Mahomes got to sit for a year. His head coach, or his offense coordinator at the time, was Matt Nagy, who's the head coach of the Chicago Bears, told me, I can't tell you how invaluable Alex Smith was in the tutoring process of Pat Mahomes. But you start looking at that offense, and you're like, Travis Kelce is one of the most talented tight ends in football. I had Wink Martindale, the defense coordinator of the Baltimore Ravens, tell me, and he's been in this business forever. He said, he goes, what's the cat's name, Hill, that plays wide receiver? Tyreek Hill. He goes, that is the most dynamic, fastest guy in pads I've ever seen, ever. Game day speed, I've never seen a faster guy. And then you start talking about the design, especially the screen game and the run game of Andy Reid. That's a damn talented football team that Patrick Mahomes got to take over. Now, he did remarkable things, and he's way beyond his years. But I'm just telling you, there's 3 of those guys. There are 4 of those guys in the NFL, and the rest of them, you better damn well have a supporting cast, otherwise they're not going to be any good.
And back to your projection of Flacco, do you believe that he could be the guy here for the next 4 years?
There ain't no, to me, the league has changed in that the way they protect the quarterbacks, you can't even land on a quarterback. You can't hit a quarterback. You can't eat onions and bacon for breakfast without getting fined in this league. The way they protect him, I think the quarterback, the prime of the quarterback's career, where you used to start hitting your prime at 27, and that was your prime into 35 or 36. I think you don't hit your prime now at that position. You're 32, 30. You're rolling in your prime at 32. So, what we've seen out of Drew Brees, what we've seen out of Tom Brady, what we've seen out of Ben Roethlisberger, what we've seen out of Phillip Rivers, a lot of that is because they've taken care of these guys. They're a huge commodity. They're $100 million players, and the league is protecting their investment. So yeah, I think he could have 3-4 years, good years in his quote unquote prime.
James Merrill out of 1043thefan.com. Is Joe Flacco the number one storyline heading into 2019 training camp road to redemption, or is there something else for you?
Boy, probably. I mean, quarterback gets all the attention, right? So that's what we're going to focus on. We've been covering it, for the last 3 years of who's going to get that job. At least we know this time in. But I think in terms of he may get the most attention, and that may be the most column inches to go back in the day. But with all the questions we've thrown out there on the offensive side in terms of inside linebackers, all the questions on this team, he shouldn't be the number one storyline. He probably will be, but he shouldn't be. But you mentioned Atlanta, and I think the upside for Joe Flacco here is what Matt Ryan did when he was in that Kyle Shanahan offense. To me, they're very similar type quarterbacks, right? Big, tall guy, big arm, can throw the deep ball, not going to beat you with their legs. They're not going to run around and make plays and really extend plays. I think that's what Joe Flacco's ceiling is here, and, man, I think we'd all take that in a heartbeat. That was MVP caliber performance, so he'll be the number one story because quarterback always is. I'm just not sure that's the number one thing to focus on.
Nick, how about you? For you when you're out there, as we're going to be there in 48 hours at UC Health Training Center, the most intriguing topic for you, or phase or person, player, whoever?
I'm looking at the offensive line. That's been a huge issue over the past couple of years. There have been a mixture and carousel of guys due to injury and deficiencies, and guys been playing out of position. And if that unit doesn't have some kind of cohesiveness, it's going to be a problem. I know we were talking about Joe Flacco being a storyline, but it is that offensive line. And I will continue to go back to this. I mean, there are 5 different guys on that offensive line that play different positions, but they have to be able to play as one. There's been a lot of pressure put on, Mike Munchak to be the guy to come back and just kind of change and retool this offensive line. And if that offensive line can be effective, and we're not just talking about Garrett Bowles, but as a group, limiting the amount of holding calls, because when that happens, that stalls drives. You're not moving the chains. That's taking points off of the board, and that's not keeping the defense on the sideline to keep them fresh. So now Von Miller and Bradley Chubb can get out after opposing quarterbacks. So it starts with that group. If they can pass protect, then we move on to being able to move a man off of his space as far as run blocking. Now, whether it's Freeman, whether it's Booker, whether it's Lindsey, no matter how Scangarello wants to use Lindsey, now we're talking about being more productive, looking different than the San Francisco 49ers offense looked last season.
And I want to skip over you just for a second, Stokey.
What?
Because I want to ask.
I was ready.
I just want to ask Mark, who's.
You better get your pen out and write down so you don't lose it.
I know.
Don't lose it.
You are Stink uniquely qualified to answer this question that Nick just sort of hit on. He said the biggest storyline for him in training camp is going to be the offensive line, and much like the quarterback, I feel like that. You're such a goof. He just Stokely, his idea was screw you, Zach. That's on my paper. We've been talking about the offensive line like we've talked about the quarterback here. They've thrown just about every resource they can at it. You got a first-round draft pick on the left side. You have a top of the second-round draft pick for the left guard. You paid the highest right tackle in the history of the sport on the right side, and you have the best offensive line coach allegedly in the sport. Is this finally the year that we can, to a certain degree, put this thing to bed, and we can wake up every Sunday knowing that our offensive line is going to be in the better half of the NFL that week?
That's a question that I can't answer until I see it. Like, you talk about using a first-round draft choice. Like, there's a lot of first-round draft choices that are great usage of the pick, and there's a lot of guys that end up being busts. You know, it's a 50-50. We had one in Paxton Lynch that we moved up to 26 to get. Couldn't play dead in the Western, but we got him, right? And so Garrett Bowles is on the fast track to either figure out a way to fix it or get cut. And that's where you are right now. And can Mike Munchak fix that? That remains to be seen. So, but that's a huge issue. And they've thrown. I mean, I always think, you know, you say chase the money or follow the money in the NFL. Like, follow the decisions they make. They can say whatever they want, but there's a huge concern over there that Garrett Bowles isn't fixable. And that's why they're paying Mike Munchak. And, you know, I know for a fact because I've talked to certain general managers in this league, I won't use any names, that said they took Garrett Bowles off the board meeting with him. So there's plenty of those guys, and there were plenty of those guys on Paxton Lynch as well.
That's right.
So those are really, like, if that's the case, those are really bad picks right now. And so you have to make that work. And I had inside information, and, you know, I mean, was told, I don't know the truth of it or not, but they were going to bench Garrett Bowles last year, and then Valdir got hurt, and they had to use Wilkinson at the right tackle position. So that was a move they were going to make last year. So this is where we are right now with this pick. And let me just tell you, as a guy who watches film and studies it all the time, like, I know when a guy doesn't know what he's doing. I can tell by this pass set. I can tell by, like, offensive linemen, when you don't know what you're doing, you know what they do? They just set and they get their head on a swivel because they're not quite sure who to block. Well, the athletes on the other side of the ball, I mean, we are exceptionally gifted athletes. We are by far the worst athlete on any football field, and it's not close. So if you're setting up telling me I'm going to block Von Miller or I'm going to block Bradley Chubb, but I'm not quite sure who I have, so let me just kind of set up and let them come at me, you'll get beat 100% of the time. And the fact that you don't change your sets and you don't set, like, there are times where you can be aggressive. There are times you have to change the angle of your set. You have to change the depth of your set. You have to change the aggressiveness of your set. You have to change the hands that you punch with. You got to do a lot of different things to play that position efficiently. When you set up the same way 100% of the time, that's why you lead the league in tackles. There were games where Garrett Bowles had more tackles than Von Miller. That's not a joke.
Here's a question
that is
for
not
you,
a joke.
Mark.
That's real.
Do you think Mike Munchak can fix him and fix all those issues?
Do I? No.
No. Okay.
I don't.
Well, and it's interesting to hear that response because we were having this discussion this past week, and Chad Brown texted me, and he said, what you're seeing from Garrett Bowles is not what he's being coached to do. He's not. It's about, and it's not about whether Mike Munchak has the goods. It's about Garrett Bowles' receptiveness to the coaching.
And not only that, it's your ability to understand it, to absorb it. And the issue that I think, the difference between guys who are physically gifted and play exceptionally well and guys who are physically gifted and can't play, and it has nothing to do with the intelligence level. I just want to put that out there. It has to do with how fast you can process information. So when things hit you and they go into your eyes, how fast does your brain process the information and you just react? You're just a football player. Because if I see something, I have to go, okay, what was I supposed to do? Uh-oh. Gone. And that's every position.
And that's why it takes rookies,
right? That's safety. That's receiver. Like, you're running
do well
around
because they're thinking so much.
Think about you. You're running around. You're outside. You're running around, and you're told, "Hey, man, if you get this look, I want you to run a post. If you get this look from the defense, I want you to turn that post into a dig, and I want you to do it while you're running 4-3-8." And you gotta absorb all that stuff while you're running. All of a sudden, you see it because the quarterback is throwing, because he sees it, and all of a sudden you run the wrong route. And it's picked off, and the quarterback, everybody goes, oh, that quarterback sucks. And you know, oh, shoot, I was supposed to adjust my – like, that stuff happens in the NFL on every single play. And if you can't process information quickly enough, I don't care who you are, you can't play in this league. That's the bottom line.
Stoke, 4-3-8.
Yeah. Wow.
I gave that to you.
Yeah. I appreciate you. You were spot on. You were spot on.
In my head, he's got more process time when he's going 5-2, but I don't know.
I got a lot of process time here. What am I going to do here? I'm ready to answer the question, though, now, Zach. Can I answer the question? It's Rich Scangarello. That's who I'm looking forward to seeing. How does he orchestrate the quarterback? How does he orchestrate the offensive line? He's the one that's calling all these shots. I want to see how he's going to look, more so than Vic Fangio, Flacco, offensive line, all these other, different pieces that are changing.
I think it's a great point, too, because the way your offensive coordinator calls plays can really help guys that are struggling, especially as an offensive line.
So he can help the offensive line. He can help the quarterback, dialing up things that Joe Flacco likes to do. So for me, man, it's Rich Cangarello, his first time ever calling plays, in that mold of Kyle Shanahan, Mike Shanahan, Gary Kubiak style. What will his style look like? So that's what I'm looking forward to seeing.
Well, it's going to be a blast. We're going to be out there, training camp 2019, road to redemption. And just to echo what I said earlier, I just don't think we could pick a better mantra here because this team, this roster, the general manager, the organization, it needs some redemption. It hasn't been good here. It hasn't been good enough. And we're about to turn the page here, starting tomorrow with the Broncos' first meeting. Everyone will be back, maybe except for Drew Lock, who's still we haven't heard news yet whether he's going to hold out or not. Sort of beside the point as 2019 is concerned. But I can't wait, and I know I speak for the group. We all can't wait to bring you your best Broncos coverage right here on Sports Radio 104.3 The Fan. Huge shout out to Brothers Barbecue, who once again did a tremendous job.
So good.
Full service catering, on-site grilling for whatever you got going on this summer. They'll deliver the delicious smoked meats and handcrafted sides no matter where you are. Hit them up. Brothers-bbq.com. Local guys, good guys. We know those guys. They do a great job.
You brought Tupperware. Delicious. You love it so much. You brought Tupperware from home.
I brought Tupperware.
Baby.
That is a
You
better
said, hey, sweetheart, I'm cooking tonight.
I got you, baby. I got you.
Who loves you? Daddy loves you.
That's right. Thank you guys for being here.
Good work, Zach. Good work.
Time. Thank you, Stoke. And my number one storyline, since no one asked me, is we
gotta go.
We'll gotta
go. And it's a drive.
No punter beef this year. No punter beef.
All right.
We got Tom Nailin and D-Mac with the drive coming up next.